Hello and welcome. I hope you're doing all absolutely wonderful today. Welcome to your Saturday book night. We are here in the library and studio for another wonderful book night. Hopefully all the sound is coming through just fine, and hopefully all of you are doing amazing. I know that I'm doing pretty darn good over here. At least that's my current state, and I'm going to stick right with it. Welcome, everyone. You know, I always have a whole lot of fun on book nights, and of course, on your Saturday night. I am your Saturday night. Welcome. I know, I keep saying it, but I'm always glad you're here. If you've been following along with the series, or at least what we've been doing recently, on Saturdays we've been getting into my fantasy novel Without the Light, Volume 1, Penance and Toil. And, of course, I have naughty kitties, as always, wandering around behind me, getting into things that they should not be getting into. That is the way it goes. I mean, it's just how it is. It's almost unavoidable. Like, I just got the cat to get off the bookshelf, so she's now trying to climb on top of computer stuff. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? Absolutely nothing. We're going to carry on. But before we get much further, a quick visual descriptor. I have long brown hair, glasses. I'm wearing a black mohair sweater. We are here in my studio and library. I have one of my paintings on an easel behind me, and I'm awash in this wonderful blue or purple or whatever kind of light this is. I think it's blue and purple. I'm not sure, but it's quite lovely. That is what I know for certain. I have myself a little drink so that we can stay hydrated for the reading. As always, it's absolutely necessary that we stay hydrated as we get into the reading for the day. But I do have some things that I want to share with all of you really quick. Obviously, I'm going to be sharing links for where you can get my novel later. And we're going to be having all sorts of conversation as we go along through the reading. I just can't avoid it. When it comes down to reading from my books, I interject. I talk. And you, of course, can go and catch up. If you haven't seen our previous streams where I do these live readings, you can catch up with the streams on my YouTube, and I'll be sharing a link of that very soon. But before we get too far off, just a fun little note for everyone. I have released prints of my artwork available through my digital gallery. Now, these prints are physical art prints, fine art prints that you can order, and they're ready to frame. There are currently 8 of them, and there's going to be more. I'm really excited about it, and I'm really excited that pretty soon we're going to get a chance to get more art out into the world, to share more creativity. So I'm excited. I hope you are too. But if you are interested in getting one of my art prints, there's going to be a link somewhere nearby, probably in the chat for this video. where you can actually visit my digital gallery and you can check out my art prints. You can see all of my fine art, my charcoal, my abstract work as it becomes available. When you go to my digital gallery on the website, there's also a link to my art workshop, The Art of Feeling. So you can actually go right there, click on that, sign up, and join one of our workshops. The next one is on May 21st. That is a Saturday, and it's from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. So consider joining, consider signing up, joining us for all the fun, getting some time to explore art and creativity. I guarantee you we're going to have a lot of fun there. And if you haven't seen the previous streams, if you haven't caught up with all of the other live readings, there are 3 videos before this in this series, and those are available on my YouTube channel, Your Saturday Night. But there is also a link in the chat, so you can go check that out. You can catch up with everything. Now, I like people to have a fair shot to know what's going on. And please, if you check out my YouTube, if you go over and watch those videos, if you could like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, I would appreciate it oh so very much. You know, it helps with the algorithm, it helps with getting people seen, and I want to be able to share with as many people as possible. I think we, and I say we as creators, we all want to be able to share as much as we can with as wide an audience as we can. But most of my videos, most of what I do is aimed at artists, creators, writers. My fantasy work is all what would fall into the realms of kind of dark fantasy and epic fantasy, from high adventure to what could be considered bordering on grimdark. And those are specific things. However, Without the Light is a fantasy series which falls more towards epic fantasy, with great adventures, seeking out new worlds, exploring fantastical and phantasmal landscapes. Encapsulating it into a few short sentences is very difficult because there's so many themes, so many topics, and at its core and at its root, it deals with, well, some deep and personal material. It deals with social justice. It deals with identity. It deals with the inner self, and it deals with topics such as self-harm and addiction and abuse. And it's not always the easiest read, but the fantasy it's wrapped in is beautiful, and I've been spending a large amount of my life creating the world, the great web, which is actually many different worlds. I'm heavily invested in this work, and I hope that you enjoy it as much as I have been enjoying creating it over many years. Oh, we're already getting to this point, so I'm just going to go ahead there. I'm going to share something in chat. Now, there is a trigger warning for the live readings for Without the Light, because some of the material is difficult for certain people to hear, and it's not always something easy to take on. But I have provided also in chat the information for Lifeline. So if you're ever feeling how some of the characters in this book feel, if you ever are feeling isolated, alone, or you need to talk to someone because you might be having thoughts with a certain finality, there are people who want to listen, and there are people you can reach out to and talk to. So please do so. We do want to listen. There's so many people out there who want to listen, and there are professionals out there, and these wonderful things like Lifeline that you can just reach out and you can get help if you need it. The world is a better place with you in it. And I know we just jump right into it. We're already into these thoughts and ideas, very large ideas, but they're important, and I can't state it enough. Should you enjoy these readings and these videos, please consider picking up a copy of Without the Light Volume 1. This fantasy series currently has 2 books. The first one has been re-released. The second one will actually be re-released also. And there are other books within the Great Web. There are currently 5 books, 2 novels, 2 novellas, and an anthology, which all take place in it. And there's going to be more stories, more adventures, more to see, more to learn. So if you enjoy great big worlds and meeting lots of characters and becoming invested in a setting, not just individual people, but you also have lots of individual people you want to really get invested in, please consider picking up a copy of Without the Light so you can have your introduction to this marvelous fantasy world and all of its many varied facets. I hope everyone is doing amazing today. Now, I will remind you all to get yourself a cuppa. At this time of day, any kind of cuppa will do, though if you reach for something like coffee, maybe go for decaf, or some tea, some nice, refreshing, relaxing tea. That would be a good idea. I can't, my nose is itching so much right now, and I'm trying not to touch it, but I have this itch that it won't go away. We're going to try to ignore it. And if you're in chat, feel free, say hello. Introduce yourself. We're going to get to reading here in just a moment. Oh, as soon as my nose stops itching. Oh my goodness. All right. Now, just guess a little recap. And of course, if you haven't read the book, be aware that every time I come on here to do a live reading, it is all spoilers. I mean, if you haven't read the novel or any of the other books that take place in the Great Web, everything here is spoilers. So, spoiler alert. So on top of the trigger warning, there is also a spoiler warning. And then there is additionally just a reminder. Yeah, actually, I'm going to go one step further. There's just a reminder. Let's all be good to each other. The world's a wild place. Let's be good to each other. So, spoiler warnings, trigger warning, let's be good to each other. Now, when I start reading, I'm going to be going back ever so slightly, just so that we can get back to where we were. So I'm only going back a few lines, just a few lines, not very far. But we're going to get right into the reading for the day. This is going to be so much fun. I hope you have fun with me. As he got to the table, I realized how high he towered above me. No body parts save his hands and face could be seen, and I wondered if there was a body under his hulking robe. He sat down next to Lily, and I couldn't tell if she was aware of him. She'd finished her waffles and was playing with the syrup on the plate. She gave no sign of awareness of the new companion at the table. He didn't speak, really, though I heard his voice. It was like a direct telepathic private line. You tread dangerous waters. Be careful not to anger those who can take your immortal life from you. His words were more dispassionate than any I had ever spoken. There was a complete detachment in him, and for the first time I felt like I had more emotion in me than another. What do you mean? I can die? I didn't speak aloud, but I knew it wasn't needed. He held up his hands and showed his palms to me. The shining silver rings on his fingers were exactly like my own. I held my hands up to him. It felt like a natural action, perhaps a custom of our kind. As I did, I remembered seeing my predecessor do this motion in front of me once. In a matter of moments, all the world went dark as if everything ceased to exist. The only light that I could see radiated out of the space between our exposed palms. You can exist at all points in time and yet be nothing. You can see any human you wish and yet never be seen. It is your duty to watch humanity and keep the balance here. To this end, you were created in the time before time. When need be, you can abandon the human world and join the other ancients in other worlds. But there is a price. Everything has a price, and you know this. You are neither the first man in the red suit or the last, just as I am neither the first nor last ferryman of souls. We all have duties to perform, and we must respect that. If we wish to move into the next world and take this girl into the worlds beyond, you must pay a price. Are you ready for that? The ferryman's words were frightening, and the fact that I felt fear at all was horrible to me. I had grown used to feeling so little, and in such a short time I had felt so much. It was more than nerve-wracking, it was torture. What is the price? I was hesitant. Are you ready for it? He asked again. I thought hard on this because I had already paid many heavy tolls to end up where I am. If the price was any heftier, I was afraid I might break under the weight of it. I wanted to help Lily, though, and any cost I had to pay seemed worth the chance. Why do I remember feeling like this before? A feeling of deja vu hit me harder than I would have liked, but I had to ignore it. I am ready if it will help Lily. I will pay whatever price I must to help her, I said as calmly as I could. Then I offer you this gift. Do you accept? As he spoke, I saw his rings lift off his fingers and move towards me. I knew the price now, and I was ready to accept it. I do. When the words left my mouth, my own rings lifted off my fingers, and in a bright flash, the 20 silver bands had changed places. I wore his rings, and he had mine. I realized quickly that we had changed clothing and positions. Good luck, ferryman, he said to me, grinning. I nodded to him and moved my palms downward. Good luck to you as well, man in the red suit, I said as he blinked from my sight. When the light returned to the world, I was sitting next to Lily, and she seemed happy playing with her syrup. The waitress returned to the table with a check and looked at the empty seat where I was. Hey, lovely, where did your dad go? The waitress asked Lily. It was clear the waitress couldn't see me. Lily just smiled and laughed. He isn't my dad. He's Courtney. He'll be back soon. Lily smiled and went back to her syrup. Neither of them could see me, and that was for the best. After all, I no longer had any money to pay, and I needed to get Lily to a gate. I felt like I was prepared now. Though looking around, it was strange to me that no one could see me. I guess that sometimes, even in a crowded room, you are alone. Lily turned her head to where I sat and smiled. She didn't see me as far as I knew, but she seemed to be looking at my face. Are we leaving again, Courtney? She asked. She must have known I was there, but it wasn't apparent to me how she knew. Perhaps she'd grown used to the sound of my thoughts. Did she hear the conversation between the last ferryman and myself? I guess it was possible, but not all that important. I had a duty to her, and now I would accomplish it. I knew where to take her, and we would ride together into the next world. Yes, Lily. You are going home. I noticed my words were no longer spoken, but instead a stream of thought. She couldn't see me, though. I knew that much. I reached down and took her hand in mine, and she seemed happy to feel my grip. You feel warm, like hot chocolate, she giggled. As I stood up and led her out of the booth, she seemed to skip along beside me as we walked out of the diner. The waitress inside started looking around frantically for the man and the little girl who just seemed to disappear into thin air. I'm sure they will be perplexed for some time about it. I think I finally started to understand where the myriad of ghost stories in the world came from. The world didn't seem to matter the way it used to. I could remember that walls and doors held the slightest amount of meaning to me as the man in the red suit. Yet now, I led Lily through them as if they posed no more resistance than air. I no longer felt the need to travel in a thought. My steps carried us over many miles. The earth moved past us as if its simple structures and oceans were just a distant memory. When I finally stopped moving, we were standing on the banks of the Euphrates. Lily looked up at me and then looked at the waters. Courtney, where are we going? Have you ever taken a boat ride, Lily? I asked. She shook her head and looked around the edge of the water. Where's the boat? I raised my hand and felt a rushing sensation, as if the water were running through my fingertips. In the water, the shape of a large gray wood boat raised up through the currents. The seats were simple wooden planks, and the only means of propulsion was a simple hand-worked rudder. Lifting Lily gently, I placed her in the boat and then stepped into the back end so I could work the rudder. It was strange how easily the ferryman's powers came to me, and I had to do so little to know what to do. Lily laughed as she splashed her hand in the water, and with a soft motion of the rudder, we turned into the current of the river. The boat moved at its own pace, and seemed to defy the pull and push of both wind and water. The task of the ferryman is simple. I must take the lost where they belong. How fortune smiled on my plight when I wasn't sure what to do. The gate at the end of the rivers was still guarded, though, and I would have to force my way past the Ananukai. That stood between me and the completion of this mission. I knew little of each of the guardians, except that their strength was great and their powers long ago harnessed. The limits of my power were difficult to tell, but that is because I hadn't touched the edges of my existence. As the ferryman, all I knew was that I had a lonesome task. No wonder I can't be seen. After all, who wants to see the one who takes them away from this life? The dead need someone to guide them when they don't know the way on their own. I would guide all that needed me, and at this moment, Lily needed me. If it weren't for her, I would have been lost. And this new step couldn't have been taken. The river seemed long when we pushed off from its shores, but now I could see what seemed like the mouth into the sea. "Is that the way home, Courtney?" Lily shouted over the sounds of the water. "Yes, that is the way." I spoke to her through my mind again as we neared the mouth of the river. The sky began to grow very bright, and the clouds had an orange hue. It was like sailing into the sunrise, but I knew that it was something else. Then I could feel it. The Ananukai, it was close. The water began to churn out in the sea. Mist rose. It was coming. "Hold on, Lily, and no matter what happens, stay close to me." As I gave her warning, she crawled into the back of the boat so she could be near me. Even if she couldn't see me, she knew where I was. Waves began to rise against the bow of the boat, and the water seemed to lift up, pouring off something titan in size. This must be the Ananukai, an ancient giant of the deep. As it rose from the water, its dark opal skin glinted in the strange light of the horizon. Its head had no visible eyes, and its mouth appeared to take up the better part of the face. A statue in many ways. Its full size was hard to tell. Only the waist and above were out of the water, but its head seemed to be crowned in clouds. Already the idea of trying to pass the Ananukai seemed a daunting task, but not impossible. It was smooth as polished stone and seemed to be just as sturdy. "Turn back, ferryman. The way is blocked." Its voice was like the cataclysm of a passing hurricane. "I must perform my task, Ananukai. Would you interfere with my duty?" I asked the titanous creature. It raised its hand and placed it in our path. But I would not let this behemoth stand in my way. I had a task to perform. "You have your task, ferryman, and I have mine. Turn back." The Ananukai said his words and did not waver in his dedication. I pushed the rudder and began to move the boat around his giant hand. I knew he would retaliate, but I had to keep my heading and stand firm. Lily hid her head under her arms and began to rock back and forth. I think she was singing a nursery rhyme, but I wasn't sure. The Ananukai bellowed out a sound like shattering thunder and crumbling stones. You will go no further. Its scream turned the sea into its own monster. The waves began tossing our small ship like a feather in the wind. Yet I wouldn't fail this time. I'd put my mind to it. I held up my hand and continued to steer the boat into the light beyond the Guardian. There was nothing that would stop me. As we pushed past him, he began to grab at the boat, and it was all I could do to keep it out of his grip. The Ananukai was strong, though, and I had no experience in fighting. As he reached again for our boat, I found I couldn't dodge his grasp this time. We were sitting on his palm as he raised the ship up to his face. Though there were no eyes, it was clear. He was staring at Lily and I. You dare try and pass, ferryman? What madness drives you to tempt my wrath? His voice was unstoppable, a clashing of sounds. I must take the girl into the gate. She has passed on from life. If we do not pass, she will remain stranded here. I spoke decisive. My hope was that he would see to letting us pass. This does not entitle you to break our covenant. These gates are to remain guarded until the end of time. You know this as well as many of the ancients. If the girl did not move on after her death, then she must wait on the living plane like the other lost souls. The Ananukai was firm in his knowledge, and that gave me hope. This was proof that I could only learn more from the others beyond this world. It is also part of the covenant that the ferryman must escort lost souls to their final destination. I am fulfilling my end of the bargain by doing my duty. I do not wish to break your oath to guard the gate, but I must not break my oath either. My firm voice and silver tongue might save me here. The Ananukai seemed to think over what I had said. After all, we both were only performing our prescribed functions in this. Your words may ring true, but I still cannot let you pass. His statement brought some disappointment to me. But then I got a rather strange plan. I looked down at Lily and took her hand. Pulling her to her feet, I was resolved to complete my mission, even if I must once more test the Ananukai's patience. I picked Lily up into my arms and kissed her forehead. Hold tight. Don't let go. I'm taking you home. As I spoke, she squeezed her arms around me. Though she couldn't see me, she could feel me. As our arms tightened, I summoned up all the strength I had and began to run across the giant hand. As his fingers tried to slam shut on us, I took a leap of faith, you could say, and landed barely on his shoulder. The world seemed to slow down as I saw the shadow of his hand reaching for us. I tried to not look back and just run. With faith, I hoped I could outrun his grip this time. I just had to clear his shoulder and leap into the light beyond him. It was a desperate move, but if I could not overpower the Guardians, I had to try to outwit them. Each step brought his hand closer, just as each step brought the gate closer. It could be conceived of as desperate, but I knew he wouldn't let me pass any other way. The world became so hard to see. I'm not sure why. Maybe the tension of the moment was clouding my mind, or maybe it was the energy from the gate distorting reality. Nothing was really certain, but I knew I couldn't give up now, and I wouldn't. His hand must have been so close to us when I jumped again, but I wasn't going to look back to check. As we were propelled from the edges of his massive shoulder, I could feel a wind at my back. The only answer I could think of was he had slammed his massive fist closed, trying to stop our escape. Too bad he missed. But I had to think of my duty to Lily. The fall seemed so fast, and the closer we came to the water, the brighter the light around us became. At the moment right before we should have splashed into the waves below, everything seemed to crawl to a standstill. My head whipped back to see Ananukai thrusting an angry hand towards us, but it was too late for him to stop our escape. The light was growing brighter, even though all time had seemed to be slowing down to the most aching of movement. We didn't move any closer to the water, and the Ananukai had become a frozen titan at our backs. Lily was trying to say something, but all sound had ceased to be. Suspended there, in time and space, we seemed to wait for an eternity, as if nothing would ever happen again. Then the light exploded outward. There was nothing anymore. Nothing, that is, except the light. I couldn't see Lily. I couldn't see myself either. The only thing that could be seen was an endless sea of orange and white. It was everywhere, and yet seemed to have no source. And I wondered if the Ananukai had succeeded, and we were now in some state of limbo between life and death. We couldn't be, though. Even if I wasn't sure what had happened, I knew a small bit about death, having been on its brink not once but twice when I was human. The light around us had become everything. It was the air, the sea, time, space. Then, without warning or reason, we began falling again, but not down. We were flying upward at a blinding speed. It felt like the trip would tear my body apart. I couldn't lose Lily, though, and I knew I had to hold on to her with all the strength I had. The ascension higher up in the light was growing faster and faster, and I wondered what kind of place we would be in when the journey stopped. Would it be like things on Earth? Would it be something I couldn't even imagine? The light around us began to take on more and more color, first shades of red and then deep purple. The light was fading until only patches of illumination existed around us. The colors grew darker and darker. Streaks of yellow and black swirled around us. The red and orange began to merge into a river of crimson and white. Flashes of blue sparked out in the distance, the way a cloud does as it voids its being of lightning. Then colors and shapes that I couldn't even start to describe danced through the ether amongst us. I turned my head downward, hoping I could see Lily again, and tried to speak to her. Still, no sound was heard, and not even my thoughts escaped me. Yet relief filled me as I could see the most subtle amount of her face. She was squeezing me tighter now. I knew she was trying to speak to me. When would this end? Just as I thought it, the movement began to slow. The colors started to become something more clear. I closed my eyes and held Lily, not knowing where we would end up. With a harsh and jarring halt of motion, it felt as if we were lying down. The ground was soft. Wasn't any pain from the sudden stop. I hadn't opened my eyes, but I knew wherever we were was a safe place. A woman's voice called to me from somewhere close. Wake up, Courtney. You still have a task to complete. I don't know who was speaking, and when I opened my eyes, there was no one. No one except Lily in my arms. I sat up and became aware that my robes were gone. As I looked at myself, I realized I was wearing only a ratty pair of dress pants. My skin was no longer gray, but pale white. Lily hadn't changed, though. I was relieved at that. She looked at me and giggled. Courtney, what happened to your clothes? She was laughing at me. But not in mockery, it was amusement. I don't know, but I like it. When I spoke, I smiled, and for the first time in a long many years, I felt happy. I could feel. Made me even happier to know that. I stood up from the ground, leaving Lily sitting in the grass, and looked at myself. I was barefoot, and everything about me seemed human. I ran my fingers through my hair. I found it was shaggy, blonde mess. God, I love this feeling. Where are we, Courtney? Lily asked, looking around us. I had to look about myself, because I wasn't sure. Behind us was a wide river flowing with red-colored water. And tied to the shore was the boat I thought we had left in the Ananukai's hand. The grass under our feet was a rich blue-green, and before us lay an almost endless field of trees and grassy fields. The trees were a strange white tone, their leaves a deep purple. They reminded me of willows, save the color. The forest ahead seemed to have a worn-down path through a wooded land ahead. I crouched down and smiled at Lily. Well, we're on our way. Want a ride? She laughed and ran around to my back, leaping up to my shoulders and giving my neck a good hard squeeze. It wasn't hard. It wasn't too hard. And it wasn't going to be a short trip. I knew that. But it wouldn't be a lonely one either. Lily was singing that nursery rhyme again as I started forward down the path. We must have made quite a pair. A filthy, shoeless man and the lost little girl on his shoulders. I didn't mind being barefoot. After all, the ground was so soft here. This must be a heaven of sorts. But since no one is out here with us, I figured it was only the outskirts of a heaven. Sometimes, even in a crowded room, you're alone. Yet here, even though it's empty, we would never be alone. Oh. Just to take a quick moment, thank you everyone for being here. I hope you're enjoying this continuation of Without the Light Volume 1. And hello over on Twitch. Oh. Things get really good from here, and we're going to get back into this in just a second. I'm just going to take a moment to share once more. There's going to be a link in the chat or somewhere nearby, depending on when you're watching this or where you're watching this, where you can get a copy of Without the Light Volume 1, Penance and Toil. And if you get a copy, please leave a review. It would mean the world to me. Reviews and ratings on books online actually are one of the best ways for an author to spread the word, as it were. Word of mouth and recommendations from others are still one of the strongest forms of endorsement for a lot of things, really. So do consider leaving a review, share the book, tweet it out, put it on your social media somewhere. I'd appreciate it so much. And I'm having fun already. I hope you're having a good time, and I hope you're enjoying the story. I have no idea why my eyes are so itchy today, but they are. They're just so itchy. Oh, goodness. Now, take another little sip, and then we will continue on. And of course, consider grabbing yourself a cuppa as we go through this. We're about to jump into the next chapter. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. Part 4. Where the road leads, we follow. The forest had no wind and no rain. There was light in the sky, but no sun. Clouds were velvety, and the sky itself was had a reddish tinge to it. As we passed through the forest of white trees, there was a soft rustle of animals now and again. I was amazed at the great number of blackbirds here. And there, we saw deer or the occasional rabbit. Now and then, a small squirrel would peek down at us from its safe hideaway in its branches of a tree. There was a calm peace to this place, and it made the journey through it that much nicer. There had been no signs of people or any kind of civilization save for the path we followed. But it had to lead somewhere. After walking what felt like hours, Lily began to yawn. "Do you need to take a break?" I asked with a laugh. After all, I was the one doing all the walking, and she was getting a free ride. "No, just sleepy." "How much further, Courtney?" she asked with another yawn. To be honest, I had no idea, but it'd be nice to take a break. "Not sure. How about we sit down for a few minutes?" I said, not as a question, but as a desire to sleep myself. I hadn't been tired in so long. The idea of a nap sounded very appealing to me. I crouched down and Lily climbed off my back. "Okay, Courtney," she said, walking over to sit beneath a tree. I followed along and joined her there. The shade was nice, but I wondered if we would be walking for much longer. Would it be hours or days before we reached something? It was so hard to tell, and there weren't any signs to tell us where we were going. "We can take a nap. Not for long. We need to get you home," I said, smiling. As I leaned against the tree, she put her head on my chest and closed her eyes. It wasn't long before she was sleeping, and I closed my own eyes to drift off. The calm nature of this place seemed safe enough to rest for a while, and it was nice to feel a lack of danger. As I drifted off myself, I had the briefest glimpse of dreams. My mind danced back in time to the Cromwell Hotel. I was seated behind my piano, playing along with the band. The crowd was dancing along with our melody, and the stage lights left a blinding set of dots in my eyes. The chug and tone of the guitar made my heart feel heavy. The sweet smell of the scotch on my breath made me want to light up a cigarette. Though I had to wait until the end of our first set, they didn't allow smoking in the hotel bar. As the music from the piano drifted along, I heard a strange crying sound. What was it? I looked around the bar, and I saw Lily crying underneath a table. What was Lily doing in a bar? She looked up at me. The real world returned to me once more, and I opened up my eyes from the dream. My first thought was to make sure Lily was all right, and as I looked down, she wasn't by my side anymore. Standing up as quick as I could, I looked around for her and began to panic. "Lily!" I yelled out into the woods. I rushed out to the path and began to look around for her. "Hi, Courtney," she said, skipping out of the woods. I sighed with relief and dropped down to my knees to offer her a hug. She skipped over me and squeezed me for a second, then leaned away. "Look what I found," she said, holding up a handful of gold-colored flowers. They looked like irises and were very lovely. No wonder she had wandered off. I forgot for a moment how beautiful this place was. "They're gorgeous, Lily. Are they for me?" I asked with a smile. She nodded her head and handed one to me. I took it and smelled its bloom. They had the aroma of melting marshmallows, and it made my nose tickle. "Who are the other flowers for?" I asked. She leaned forward and put her mouth next to my ear. "These are for Mommy," she whispered. I felt concerned when she said it. After all, I had no idea if we'd find her mother in this place. I didn't want to upset her, so I smiled and ran my hand over her head. "I'll bet she'll love them, Lily." I held my hand out to her. She took my hand. We stood up once again to walk down the path. Lily skipped along beside me, and soon I was skipping along with her. She began to sing that funny nursery rhyme again, and I couldn't help but try to join in. She giggled every time I got the words wrong. but it was all in fun for her. A few more hours down the path, and I couldn't help but feel excited. There was finally a sign in the road, and more so, a fork in the path. The trail split in two, and neither path looked any different than the other. "Which way do we go?" Lily asked. I wasn't sure, but the signs might make things easier. "Well, right takes us to the kingdom, and left takes us to the city," I told her with a smile. The question is, which one is where she needs to go? I wasn't sure which was which. Either one could be the final destination of the dead, but I really wasn't sure. The kingdom sounded promising, though, and I doubted that a city would be where she'd find a home. It was anyone's guess, though. I hadn't learned enough to know the difference. "Can we go to the city, Courtney? I've never been to the city," she said, tugging at my hand. I didn't want to tell her she was in a city when we saw Courtney, the other Courtney, but I also felt a touch of hesitation in going there. "I think we need to head the other way, Lily." "Please, Courtney. I'll be good. I promise," she begged. I sighed and crouched down to look in her eyes. "Okay, Lily, but we can't stay there long. Hop up for a ride." I conceded, but felt nervous as she climbed onto my back again. Something made me worried about going to the city, and I felt it would be good not to dilly-dally there too long. But I didn't want to disappoint her, so we'd go. I knew my instincts weren't all wrong. Standing up, I took the first steps down the path and waved goodbye to the signpost. Fortune had seen fit to leave us with a path, but it hadn't made clear how confusing the road would be. Lily was singing again and braiding my scruffy hair. She seemed unaware of how worried I was. As we went further down the path, the trees became more clustered around the edges, and soon they were blotting out most of the light from the sky. In a few more miles, there appeared rows of old-fashioned streetlights with oil lanterns hanging from them. It gave an eerie feeling, and I tried not to show my concern. "It's really dark here. Is the city always dark?" Lily asked me. "Well, it can be. But we aren't in the city yet, Lily." In the distance, I saw an iron-barred gate in the path. The look of it made me think of a cemetery, and its grim little lanterns were like eyes looking out at us. As we approached closer and closer to the gate, I could see a stone walkway beyond it, and I thought I could see gray brick buildings as well. "Is that the city?" "Yes." "Are you sure you want to go?" "Yes." Her answer seemed shaky, but I wasn't sure if it was just my own fear that made her afraid. When we got to the giant iron gate, it was very clear that a towering metropolis lay beyond it, and I could see sparse numbers of people walking about. There was something odd about them, and more so about the way they looked. It was a population of shadows, and each one moved through the world unaware of anything other than themselves. "We can turn back if you want, Lily," I said calmly. I could feel her shaking her head, but I didn't know if it was a yes or a no shake. "We can look quick and then go back," she said bravely. I pushed the gate open and was surprised how smoothly the ancient-looking metal slid on its hinges. As we stepped through the gate, the first real view of the city came into sight. The buildings were somber and rose high out of view. The streets seemed narrow and foreboding. I turned to look at the gate and saw that it was built into the side of a massive and endless wall. Beyond the gate, I still saw the thick and macabre forest, and was more relieved by its presence than I had been while we were in it. Turning back to the city, I walked down the road ahead of us, holding tight on Lily's ankles. Strange shadow people moved along by us, and the city was little more than a ghost town. The further in we went, the louder a distant sound became. and I swore it was the music of a carnival. Thank you so much, everyone joining me on Twitch, and thank you for being here. Every few steps, I'd look back to make sure we could still see the gate in the wall, and then I walked deeper into the urban misery. The sound of carnival music was getting louder now, and I was sure that it was from some sort of fair or celebration. "Look, Courtney," Lily said, pointing at something. As I looked out in the distance, I could see a black and yellow circus tent deep in the city. It must be where the music came from, and was the only thing worth looking at so far here. "Want to see it a little closer?" "I hope they have elephants," she giggled. As we moved closer, it was clear that the tent was gigantic. It filled blocks and blocks of the city. The shadow people didn't give any notice to it, though, and went along without concern. When we approached its edges, I saw a line of people slowly going inside the tent. They looked blank. But there were people of all sorts lined up, waiting to get inside. From the looks of them, there were even inhuman things in the line. Several of the creatures had the telltale silver rings of ancients. I looked at my own hands and saw that my rings were still there. I'd almost forgotten about them. How are their faces so empty? "Can we get in line, Courtney? I want to see the circus." "Okay, but if it takes too long, we'll have to leave," I said to her, trying to be optimistic. Walking to the back of the line, I realized that it seemed to be moving rather steady, taking the devoid patrons at a nice clip into the tent. As we moved along, I noticed that people were already lining up behind us at a fast pace. The many walkways of the city poured out random blank-faced seekers of whatever the circus tent had to offer. As we moved towards the front of the line, a strange creature came into view at the entrance. He wore a curious plaid top hat and plaid coat with a long set of tails. The creature appeared to be some sort of upright lizard thing. His eyes moved around independently of each other, his skin a sickly yellowish brown, and his muzzled face was painted up like some sort of clown. As each new person came into the tent, he handed them an enormous purple ticket, which he snapped off a roll hanging from his wrist. If you could call them that. His hands were long and bony and seemed to have far too many joints in each of his fingers. It became clear as we got closer to the bizarre ticket vendor that each of his hands had 7 fingers and his feet looked the same. His body was hunched over severely, but he still stood taller than any of the patrons in line. It couldn't have weighed very much because its body was so thin and bony. Though I wouldn't fare a guess as to how powerful the thing might be, no doubt it held secret abilities, much like all things I had encountered so far. Lily hugged me tightly, probably because the atmosphere of this place had a growing oppression. I would have stepped out of line, but soon we were standing right at the entrance, next to the ticket vendor. "2 for the show?" it asked in a strange drawl. The voice made me think of Sophisticate, some sort of gentleman, but its disturbing visage brought up more nightmarish thoughts. "Do you have elephants?" Lily asked him. One of its eyes looked up at her, and the other looked down at the ticket roll. "We have many things inside, little one." Its voice didn't seem threatening, but instead kind of deadpan. It broke off 2 tickets and handed them to me. "Don't stay long, Mr. Rubel. You still have things to do, yes?" The thing spoke to me in a way I did not find comforting. I nodded as I took the tickets and then made my way past the thing holding tight onto Lily. As we entered the tent, there was a cavalcade of bleachers and show rings. The place was separated into many different smaller tents, several classic circus rings. There was a midway and dozens of wooden shacks where various monstrous things were peddling their wares to the many patrons. I wasn't sure if this was a distraction or some obtuse purgatory for those who had lost their way. It didn't seem like anyone was enjoying themselves here. That is, except for the strange performers and salesmen. Lily pointed off at one of the rings and bleachers and laughed. There was a set of acrobats of mildly human nature performing on a high wire. I couldn't help but smile, and then made my way toward the bleachers to watch. I set Lily down on a seat and then sat down next to her. For a small time, the circus of monsters was an enjoyable distraction. Lily seemed entertained by the antics of the various faceless acrobats, and when a parade of skeletal clowns began to perform beneath them, she jumped over to me, hiding her face in my side. "Let's see what else is here," I said to her. She nodded her head, taking my hand. We walked through the midway to see a stretch of games and tests of skill. Blank-faced patrons threw balls at bottles and fired off pellet guns into targets. There were strange dart games and strength tests, the sort where you tried to ring a bell by swinging a hammer at a little target. I noticed many of the creatures working the games were looking at us. No, not us. Just Lily. After all, they must have known I was on a mission, but Lily, she must have seemed like fair game. A fact came to my mind. There weren't any of the shadows here like there were in the city. Yet in the city, I didn't see any of the half-living blank-faced people like I saw here. They seemed to materialize from nowhere and get into line for this demonic circus. I also didn't see anyone leaving, and a sudden horror came to mind. Did this carnival change the lost souls into those shadows? I had to get Lily out of here, and quickly. "Come on, Lily. We need to leave." She frowned, but I knew I had to get her out of here. I crouched down and motioned for her to climb up on my shoulders again. "Okay." She said it sadly, but it was for the best. She climbed up on my shoulders, and I stood back up. Turning to make my way back to the entrance, I saw a group of the lizard things standing in our way. There was 5 of them, I could see, but I wasn't about to underestimate their resources. "Where are you going, little one? We still have things you must see." The one in the middle spoke in that same guttural drawl. I held my hand up to show them my rings and hoped they would respect my position. "She's going where she belongs." "She belongs here with us. We can give her anything she wants." His words sent a shudder down my spine. I'd heard this kind of pitch before, and I wasn't going to let him use it on her. I held her ankle tight and spread my fingers out, holding my hand firmly out in front of me. "No, you can't. She has a destination better than this one," I said, and reaffirmed the strength in my voice. I could feel Lily shivering as she tightened her grip on my neck. No doubt she was as afraid as I should have been, but I had to be strong for her. "Mr. Rubel, you have no power over us. In our city, you might as well be human." The creature hissed at me. I stepped forward, holding my hand out still. I wasn't sure, but I think the others flinched back slightly. They'd given up what their leader would try to hide. "I am the ferryman, and you will not detract me from my duty. Step aside." I summoned up a harsh tone. As I moved forward again, other creatures flinched and stepped backward. Their leader stood his ground, though, and I respected that kind of bravery. "She is a lost soul. She should be here with us. We can take away every shard of pain she feels." The creature pushed forward towards me as he spoke. Lily whimpered quietly on my shoulders. "Let's leave, Courtney." I stepped forward again, and the other creatures jumped backward, yet their leader refused to move. He stepped forward, snarling at my raised hand. "Give her to me," the thing grunted. I stepped forward again and pushed my hand towards him. When I did, the other creatures ran off into the clutter of the midway. Their leader seemed to cringe at the presence of my hand. "I will take her, then," it yelled and leapt at me. I jumped out of the way, and the creature landed in a feral crouch on the ground. It turned and bared its teeth and made another leap. As quickly as I could, I clenched my fist and swung my hand into the side of its face. There was a shrieking sound as it flew down to the ground again. Its face had a hot mist rising from the imprint of my rings in its skin. The beastly thing struggled back to its feral position. Soon others were crawling out from in between the shacks and tents of the circus. I couldn't fight all of them, and I wasn't about to try. We'd have to run. That's what I intended to do. Hold tight, Lily. We're getting out of here. Her hands dug into me, and she slung tight into my neck. I started running and couldn't help but wonder why things seemed to always come back to this déjà vu. I pushed through crowds of empty vessels that once were people, jumped over a group of crates that held God knows what. I could hear the growing thrall of monstrous lizard creatures behind me, and I knew that I couldn't look back. As I pushed past a line of people pouring into another smaller tent, I felt Lily start to fall from my shoulders. I tried to skid to stop and grab her, but she already was falling to the ground. Turning around, I saw an unnumbered wave of the creatures descending on us, and I wasn't sure if I had time to grab her. I acted out of instinct, grabbing her arm, and with one hand throwing up my other palm to face them. Sound began to fall away. Light around us flickered out briefly. Time slowed again, and the motion of the wave of enemies became a mass of faces to me. There was a moment where time stopped completely, and then light grew between my spread open fingers. As time started to speed up again, I pushed my foot backwards like I was at the starting block of a race. Then something burst through my body as I launched forward, holding tight onto Lily's arm. We moved like a blinding wind, and the creatures blew away from me as if I was a train and barreled through their path. I pulled Lily up to my chest, and she wrapped her arms around me tightly again. Our surroundings still seemed to be moving out of sync with time, and the creatures around us formed a tunnel of flying bodies. As time returned to some amount of normalcy, the army of monstrous things crashed against the circus buildings and flew through the walls of the tents. I was running again, this time straight at the tarp wall of the big tent, and with a quick upward motion of my palm, it tore open like thousands of razor blades had been fired through it. I could hear the creatures behind us regrouping to follow, but I wasn't going to be stopping this time, and I wasn't going to drop Lily again. As soon as we were rushing down one of the city walkways, I could see the giant wall that surrounded this urban hell. The iron gate wasn't in my sight, but I'd have to find it. For a moment, I turned my head back to see if they really were following. It would have been better if I hadn't seen the thousands of angry lizard things chasing us down, but it was only my heart that felt the fear of being caught. My body was filled with a surge of strength as I careened down the narrow walkway, and when I reached the giant stone wall, I turned and left and kept running. I wasn't really sure if this was the only way to the gate, but I was following instinct, not intellect now. The crashing of the beasts against the wall was like the sound of waves smashing into a cliffside. I kept running and kept scanning the wall for the iron gate. There was a fear of them following me into the forest path, but I prayed they wouldn't. As I saw the gate in the distance, I pushed my legs harder. I had to make it to the gate. I had to do it before they caught up with me. I could see clearly that the iron gate door was still open from when I came into the city. As my heart seemed to lift at seeing my escape route, I felt the sharp sting of claws dig across my back. I tried not to stumble, and I kept running. They must have been so close now, but as I rounded the edge of the gate and slammed it closed behind me, I felt so relieved. Turning back to look at the gate, I saw thousands of lizard people staring at me expectantly. "Please, Mr. Rubel, give her to us." The leader's steaming wounds were more prominent as he spoke. His hands reached through the gate longingly, almost how one might reach for a lost toy. He almost seemed sad, but that wouldn't make me turn over an innocent girl. As I turned away and began to walk down the path, I could hear the cries of the things behind me. I felt some pity for them, as I turned to see their leader down on his knees reaching through the gate for us. If he could have cried, I'm sure he would. The city was a sad place, and I was happy that we were free of it. For all the distractions and entertainment they had, they didn't have any life. The creatures envied the lively nature of Lily, and decided to even attack an ancient to try and have her. She deserved something better, though. I would take her to where she belonged. We would follow the road back to the signpost, and then I would take her to the kingdom. After all, where the road leads, we follow. Be it for better or worse, we had to see what was here. I carried Lily all the way to the fork in the road, and then set her down. She'd fallen asleep on the way back, and it was for the best. My body was weary and my mind exhausted. I had to sleep as well. I curled up beside her in the grass and fell into a deep, much-needed slumber. The pain in my back was excruciating, but it didn't keep me from sleeping. I felt the warm embrace of dreams. I hope you are all enjoying this reading. Oh my goodness. I'm having a good time. I hope you're having a good time. I have once more put a link to where you can get a copy of Without the Light Volume 1, Penance and Toil, in the chat. If you're watching this in the future, there will be a link somewhere nearby if you'd like to pick up a copy. The further into this adventure we get, the stranger things are going to become. And I hope that this dive into the oddities of some sort of afterlife or world beyond this world are enjoyable for all of you. Also, don't go to the city. If it wasn't patently clear. Oh, we are coming very close, though, to the end of the show for today. But we don't have much left of this chapter. So let's go ahead. We're going to get our way through the last bit of this. That way we can start on a brand new chapter when we come back again. I felt the warm embrace of dreams, and I could see the messy interior of Zenevie's cab. "Where are we headed, business class?" Cabby asked me with an accent so garbled it was hard to tell where he came from. "Cromwell Hotel. I recall they had a nice steakhouse there. I said back to him. The cabbie looked back at me for a moment and then laughed in a kind of snorting way. Cromwell closed down business class, but I took you to a place just as nice. It's my cousin's favorite. You like it, the cabbie said and began to speed off down the road. I leaned back in my seat and sighed. I liked the Cromwell, and I still had the money to go there. Curiosity crept in as I wondered why it had closed. It had always been so popular. At one point in time, I had played piano there with a house band every weekend, though that was a few years back now. What's your name? I asked the cab driver. Zenevieve, but if you have a hard time, you call me Zen. Everyone other speaks to me Zen. Zen, you drive too fast. Zen, you forget my birthday. Zen, you need to shower. So you can call me Zen. We can be buddies, yeah? The cabbie said with an overstated bit of humor. Well, Zen, it occurs to me that I'm eating alone, and I haven't had a buddy in a long time. Do you have time to take a break from driving and eat? I asked him, a little taken back by the fact that I had said anything at all. Something started shaking my arm, and I turned my head towards the van window. There was a little girl staring at me. It was Lily. I leaned over to open the door and let her in. She shouldn't be out on these streets alone. When I opened the door, a light blinded me briefly, and when the world came back into focus, I was laying in the grass next to the sleeping girl. Lily looked so peaceful in the grass, so I decided to let her keep sleeping. The thought of food came to mind, and I decided to search the area for something we could eat. The trees didn't seem to have any fruit I could see, so I went deeper into the woods looking for something. Anything, really. In a few minutes, I saw a weird-looking bush with blueberries hanging from it. I wasn't sure what they were exactly, but they were food. I clutched my arm to my body to make a little basket and piled as many berries as I could in it. I leaned back and carefully walked back to Lily with the impromptu breakfast. She hadn't been awake long and was pulling the leaves off of a flower stem. When she saw me coming out of the woods, she smiled and stood up. Brushing the dirt from her dress, we smiled but didn't speak much as the communal meal was eaten. I think she was trying to forget the city as much as I was. The blue-colored berries reminded me of the taste of wine, but then again it had been so long I questioned my memory. Lily seemed to like them, which was good enough for me, and the time spent resting was well-deserved. When we had finished, Lily laid back down in the grass and looked up into the sky. She was making shapes out of the clouds and would mumble to herself what each one looked like. I heard her giggle about a giraffe in a raincoat and a fish with an umbrella. The innocent drifting of her imagination was soothing to my troubled mind. I stood up from the grass and walked out into the path, looking down the one that led to the kingdom. I couldn't see anything down the path, but it had been the same with the other until we neared the city. I could hear Lily talking to herself about the clouds, and then there was silence. "Courtney! Does it hurt?" She cried out, and I heard her sit up. "What?" I was perplexed. She came over to me and touched my back lightly. When she did, my legs buckled under their own weight. The wound in my back pulsed with a deep, burning pain, and I bit my lip so I wouldn't swear in front of her. I'd almost forgotten the wound until now and was curious what it must look like. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get you hurt." She started crying. I turned to her and gave her a hug. "It's okay, Lily. It isn't that bad." I faked a smile even though I could feel sweat coming down my face. She had some tears in her eyes, but she smiled. I ran my thumb over her cheek to wipe her tears away and then ran my hand over her head. "You kept your promise. You kept me safe," she said. I put my finger over her mouth in a shushing motion and smiled. I wouldn't ever break my promise. She wrapped her arms around me, and I hugged her back. Leaning forward, I lifted her up so her arms were around my shoulders, and I squeezed her tight. Let's go. We have a kingdom waiting for us. I teased her. She laid her head on my shoulder, and I began walking down the path that led to the kingdom. A kind breeze finally started blowing through the forest, and our journey took us towards the next possible good fortune. Where the road leads, we follow. We are a pair of friends, and there is no doubt of that now. Oh, that is the end of the 4th chapter. I do hope you're enjoying this. That will also be the end of the reading for today. So much fun, so much story to get through, so many more things coming ahead. Now, just so everyone knows, I'm just going to look at my little calendar here for a second. So, next week I will not be reading. We're going to get into something else. It might be art, or it might be some other fun evening that we will spend together for next Saturday night. But the week after that, we will get back to reading. We are about a little less than a quarter of a way through the book, so there is so much more ahead. I know that does mean, though, this is already our 4th video, so, we might have, I guess it's hard to say, we might have maybe 10 more of these, I don't know. We'll find out, right? I can't necessarily say exactly how many more live readings it's going to take to finish Volume 1, but I do hope that you keep coming back, you keep enjoying it. There is a link somewhere nearby in the chat that you can go and check out the book. You can get yourself a copy. If you get a copy, please leave a review. It would mean the absolute world to me, and it helps other people find interesting books to read, to sometimes even judge whether or not they're going to read the book. Reviews, recommendations, ratings, they are the best advertisement that an author has. Oh. And just before we move on, thank you so much for being here. Now, I do want to, again, remind you that, and there's going to be a link somewhere nearby for this too, and this is a link to my website and my digital gallery. I now have art prints. There are 8 art prints available, and much like the one that is on screen right now, which is in a simulation setting, so you can see one of the art prints that's available. You can get one of the art prints on my website in my digital gallery. They are all ready to frame. They come in various sizes. There are 8 of them currently. If you'd like to add some art to your life, maybe you want to dress up your office, maybe you want to add a little fun to your family room or your home or your apartment. Maybe you have a restaurant, whatever it might be. If you'd like to get yourself an art print just to add a little extra fun, flavor, and flash to your environment and also support the arts, you can do so by picking up one of my art prints. Some of them are limited, so that's just another way that you can help support me. You can support the arts. You can support all these wonderful live streams, our videos, our films, the books that come out, the poetry, art workshops, all of that is made possible by all of you absolutely wonderful, marvelous people. Of course, have one of the best one of you in the chat right now. thank you so much. And I hope you enjoyed today's live reading. Do come back for the next one, and also come back next week. I will announce at some point during the week whether or not we're going to be doing art or film talk or what we'll be doing. So just keep your eyes out for live streams, posts, and other news coming. Otherwise, take care. Be excellent. Get yourself a cuppa of something. This has been your Saturday book night. And all of you have been absolutely awesome. Decaf, preferably, depending on the hour. But definitely, you deserve a cuppa. Alright. I am out of here, though. Thank you for being here. Take care. Be excellent. And join us again for more adventures in the great web and all sorts of other amazing fun. All right. Bye, everybody.